good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Definitely good evening. I see there's already some folks in Hong Kong and a few other places that are starting to pile on. Please make sure that you weigh in on where you're coming from. And also, we've got a great treat, a special guest on BCDR who'll be joining us in just a few minutes. And so bring your best questions on what real disaster recovery ought to look like for your environment along the way. But before we go there, let's kind of remind ourselves about this series. So we're still using data from the Data Protection Trends 2022 report. And if you haven't downloaded that report yet, it's VEE.am/DPR22. Feel free to download that. Let me walk you through a couple of the slides to set the stage for what we're going to talk about for today. And the first one is looking at what are the major causes of outages over the last 2 years. And you can see here, as we've typically done in the past, the long lines is choose all the things that might apply, all the causes of outages that might be there. And then the short lines are what were the most impactful. And I think there's two meta trends that are worth pointing out just to kind of set the stage for us. When we talk about the most common causes of outages in 2021, it's still that stuff breaks, right? Networks still fail, hard drives still die, OSs still patch badly. Stuff still breaks. As opposed to the most impactful outages are human caused, right? So we have bad humans, cyber events, and then silly humans. Some of us call them users. That they delete data, they overwrite data, they just mishandle data. Silly humans. So those are the causes of outages that we have, and because of that, what you see is that on average, in most organizations, this comes from the largest independent research project of its kind, 3,400 organizations. On average, 40% of servers will have at least one unexpected outage over the course of time. Now, if that's the problem, that's the villain that we're all trying to solve for as long as we've been in the data protection business, let's talk about the hero and introduce our co-host for today, the very famous VMIS 33 herself, Melissa Palmer. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me on again, Jason.
So Melissa and I'm a huge fan of everything that Melissa does around BCDR. Melissa, you had a new blog that posted last week. I think the URL for that is on the bottom of the screen down below. It's actually a really long URL if you look at that one. So if we can, let's go ahead and put that into our chat. If you can't remember the long URL, just go to veeam.com/blog. And then you've got a new brief, which kind of pulls a lot of this stuff together. Talk to the folks about, how this kind of came together, and then let's talk about a few of the data points and how what it really means for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were looking at all of the great DPR22 data once it came back. And as Jason and I kind of took a look at things, and Jason kind of let me get a good look at what he was going to be polling the audience with, so to speak, we decided, there's a lot of really good, interesting data here that's specifically focused on business continuity and disaster recovery. And a couple things that we really wanted to get from this data was how are people recovering? What are they doing it? We really wanted that kind of data Jason just talked about before to kind of prove that, hey, you do in fact need disaster recovery. That's something that we've been saying for a long time, but sometimes people don't always believe us. And there's one other proof point that I really wanted to drive home because, I've been talking to a lot of people about ransomware. I do a lot with security of Veeam as well. And I've been talking about disaster recovery. And it turns out if there is a ransomware event, a really good thing to have in place is a disaster recovery plan, because ransomware is a disaster, basically.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We're going to cover that. But you know what? We should also make sure we cover where folks are coming in from. The streams are already pretty busy on that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the map really quick and see where folks are coming in. All right. So first, you got to love it when Canada's in the house, right? Like a big chunk of the planet just turns a beautiful shade of Veeam green. So welcome up to my neighbors in the north. Along with that, it looks like we've got Ohio in the house and Colorado's, Nevada. Now, Melissa, you're not going to be there, but I'm going to be in Nevada in the middle of May.
Yes.
Hopefully folks will be out there for that. Massachusetts is representing this morning, so good morning over there. Let's see if we look a bit further south. What do we got? Jamaica, actually, not good on the little islands, but I'm pretty sure that's Jamaica. Let's go over to the old country. Take a look over in, we got Spain, we got France, Austria's in the house, Greece, one of the few countries I still want to visit and I haven't had a chance to yet. A little bummed on that. And then over in APJ, hey, Hong Kong's in. I gave touts to them at the beginning of the hour. Love Hong Kong as a city. And then, is that Sri Lanka? We don't see them very often. So Sri Lanka, welcome for joining the program for today. Thank you for doing that. Okay, so yeah, so please keep piling on. Tell us where you're from. Give us your best questions. Truly, there is no one better to answer them than my co-host who's on for today. So let's kind of get into it now. Now, Melissa, you've kind of coined this phrase. At some point, we're going to get marketing to print some T-shirts for you that says this.
I already have a T-shirt that says it. I should have worn it today.
You should have worn it today. Since you didn't wear the T-shirt, I go ahead and put on the slides for you. Ransomware is a disaster. Talk about what you mean by that, and then let's talk about what the data says about it.
Absolutely. So like I said, if you are looking at a ransomware attack, you're really most times looking at a full site, large scale outage. And what does it sound like we would need if that happened? It seems like from kind of everything we know in the traditional IT space, we would need a disaster recovery plan. And when I say that, a lot of people are shocked because they have just never put the two together. They have never put together disaster recovery and ransomware. And when you start looking at organizations and their security pieces of the organization, as it turns out, disaster recovery, it more often than not lately has been sitting in the cybersecurity organization. So really, sure, ransomware is a disaster.
Yeah, when we think about it, and I also pretend to be a BCDR person from a couple of my last lives back again. If you think about it, disaster recovery really is around the durability of IT systems and whether those systems are on fire, underwater, under earth, lack of power, or wholly encrypted. Right? Any way you look at it, those systems are just,
you still can't use them.
Unavailable. There's a big X, not open for business kind of thing. And actually, that's probably the right way to transition that, because while disaster recovery is about IT durability, business continuity says, look, IT is just part of my problem. I just need the business to do what the business is going to do. Right? And you can't do that if all your data is encrypted. So I mean, and so I love the fact that organizations are seeing that. I think one of the problems that so many organizations understand, though, is that when we used to talk about BCDR back when you and I were first doing this many moons ago, earthquakes are a maybe, right? Fires are an if.
Yeah.
Floods are a potential. Ransomware is inevitable for almost all organizations. Melissa, last week I had Chris Hoff on, and we talked about how 76% of orgs have had at least one ransomware event in the last 12 months, and the other 24% are probably, some of them are in a state of denial. So that is the when, not the if. I love this, though, because we finally see one strategy. That's something that we haven't seen in a long time.
No, we haven't seen it.
So imagine this. Even many moons before Melissa was even involved in this, and I was swapping tape drives back in some dark cubicle underneath the skyline where you could see the great golden ball of joy called the sun. Back then, the cyber folks and the backup folks, we didn't talk to each other. We didn't know who each other were, right? And now, fast forward 30 years. This is part of a recovery scenario. Now, Melissa, before we get off of this slide, though, so I love the fact that we're talking about one strategy, right? So 40% of orgs say that it's a holistic strategy between cyber and the other kinds of disasters. 48% say mostly integrated. So what do we got? 88%. So 7 out of 8 orgs are at least mostly, if not wholly, combined. And yet the methods are going to look a little different, right? Because with fire and flood, you power up that last copy as quick as you can. That's exactly not what you want to do for cyber.
Yeah, it's not necessarily with cyber, right? And that's the issue, right? Every disaster is different, whether it be a traditional disaster or a ransomware event. You don't know exactly what's going to unfold until it happens, right? So you kind of have to unpack everything and have different strategies in place. And when we're talking about disaster recovery in the context of ransomware, it's really going to tie into that wider security response, right? So there's a lot of things that have to happen before you even think about hitting that recovery button with a ransomware attack. So depending on what kind of comes out through those early phases, and some organizations have been able to say, hey, we can pinpoint the ransomware came in this date, so we're going to go to the restore point directly before that and start restoring still to an isolated environment, making sure everything's good to go. But a lot of it is going to depend on what unfolds during the event as a whole.
I love that. I don't think I've heard it put quite that way before, but I love that idea of you say you have a single strategy, but your first step is understanding that scope of calamity and how you're going to
Exactly.
and what the impact is. Because I guess you do the same thing for I've lost power is different from my data center is underwater, right? Because in one case, you technically do still have access to the original metal. In the other cases, you don't. This is just a difference in the circumstances. Your playbook should be holistic of all of them. Figure out why first, and then go into the steps how. So we had a great question, and I'm going to bring this up as we talk about the second of the data points, looking at kinds of recovery methods. And Melissa, I think you kind of queued this up a little bit in that depending on what kind of crisis you have, will determine to where you're going to recover. But first, I want to address Mark's question. Mark's watching from YouTube this morning. Mark's talking about how he's planning on air gapping weekly tape backups. Are people doing immutable daily backups, or is space a restriction? Melissa, we part of this, I really want to talk about some of the data that we had from our ransomware research project, but that's not going to come out until day one of VeeamON, so I don't get to share that data. But well, you tell your answer first, and then I'm going to say what I'm not supposed to say about the data that we can't cover.
Okay, I will say that people are absolutely doing daily immutable backups, right? And Veeam makes that easy a number of different ways. We've got the hardened repository where you can basically turn a commodity Linux system into immutable backup repositories. There's all sorts of S3 compatible storage systems or cloud-based storage that support immutability. So absolutely, yes, people are doing daily immutable backups. And honestly, if I was in the position where I was setting up backups today, I would probably do that today as well.
Oh, good. I didn't have to leak anything. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Is that your goal would actually? I believe the goal should be that you should be running as immutable storage in every part of your data repository lifecycle. For most organizations, the gold standard in data protection is to go to disk first, right? But there's a lot of fantastic immutable on-premise options between immutable object stores that are on-prem. We do a hardened Linux repository, which is flawless from that perspective. So be thinking about that, or simply a dedupe array that happens to have a locking mechanism. So lots of ways to get that done. But all the way through your life cycles, that it goes from disk first, which is going to give you your fastest recovery options, to tape for dailies, for weeklies, for monthlies, for forevers, right? Certainly there are some cloud repositories. There are enough options in the market today that you can be immutable in every tier of where that stuff is.
And there are so many options. I just want to mention it can be cost effective, right? If you're sitting here thinking, oh, I need all new storage, blah, 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 you might actually not. And that's one of the great things about the flexibility of Veeam being hardware agnostic, right? There's so many solutions that Veeam works with. We have a huge list of, Veeam ready immutable object storage providers out there that no matter what your requirements or price point is, there's absolutely a solution that will fit you.
I just got to, by the way, mention, I just love the fact that Dave Russell chose to take this week off so that you could come on.
Thank you.
Because if there's a Q&A about tape, he'd be like, yes. And so I have to channel that for him and say, yes, God bless tape in 2000.
But there's nothing wrong with tape. I want to make that perfectly clear too. Nothing wrong with it.
There's nothing wrong with tape. It's funny how in so many environments, people still think about tape as it was 20 or 25 years ago. Because everything in IT looks exactly like it did 25 years ago. Wait, no, that's not true. Nothing does. And that includes tape. Tape is absolutely a viable option today. All right. Let's talk about, though, bring it back to this, back to the solution scenarios. One of the interesting questions that was asked in the DPR research is where you're going to recover from. Now, Melissa, you already kind of teed this up with first understand the cause of the outage, and that's going to dictate where you might or might not be able to recover from. But there's some meta themes that you get out of this. Would you like to walk us through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're looking at this, We've got a pretty good split between people recovering on premises and starting to adopt cloud technologies more and more. And again, it goes back to every disaster is a little bit different, and where do I need to go? Let's take the case of ransomware, for example, right? If somehow the malicious actors have made it to the DR site, the law enforcement might be involved and be like, sorry, you can't actually touch that, which is where recover in cloud becomes so important. And there's so many different ways to recover in cloud as well. You could be leveraging a service provider. You can be leveraging a VMware-based cloud solution. You could be leveraging a cloud native solution like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, right? No matter what, there's a way to test that ahead of time, right? Make sure that it's going to work, and a way to, again, meet your requirements and price point with any combination of those technologies. And the big thing is doing the upfront planning, right? And knowing going in that this disaster could be different than anything we've experienced before, and we do actually need multiple recovery scenarios, right? Just going to our second data center might not cut it anymore.
I love that. One of these days, Melissa, you and I, if we ever get the chance to be back in person together again, we should really draw out what a flow chart of this could really look like. Because I think the first thing you have to figure out is, okay, so is the original metal available or not? Right?
Right.
That would be question number one.
Or
question
when
number
will
two
it be
is,
available, right?
Say again.
Or when will it be available? If it's not going to be
Yes.
available, do I have an ETA? Or do I know that in a couple weeks I'll be back? Or is this a total loss scenario and I need to do something completely different?
Yeah, so if the original metal survives and it has availability from an SLA perspective, can I still meet that? Then you go down one set of paths. Then the other question is, what about my repositories? Are my repositories only on-prem? Are they only in a cloud? Or are they only in some vault someplace? I got to pay for a guy in a white van to come and bring it back. I mean, there's all kinds of options like that for where am I going to be recovering from? And when you put those two things together, then you start to figure out where will I recover to? The punchline here, though, and I'm not a marketing person, but the punchline here, by the way, is that in all four of these decision outcome trees, Veeam has an option, right? Veeam can do all four.
Absolutely. And even today, there's many ways, again, to kind of put together the Veeam total solution of meeting all these different requirements, being able to recover in different places. And I would say, if you don't plan on registering for Veeam, you should absolutely do, because we're going to be talking about, the next generation of the Veeam products coming out. We're going to be talking about Veeam Availability Suite version 12, as well as Veeam Disaster Recovery Orchestrator version 6. So that's going to be really interesting. And hint, hint, you should really go to that session to learn more about disaster recovery.
You should absolutely, because you'd be super excited and happy if you went to that session. So you should.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dang it. All right. Now, speaking of where you're going to recover from and where you're going to recover to, let's find out where the questions and the answers are coming from. Let's go back to the map for a second and take a look at where folks are piling in from. All right. So if we take a look in the U.S., so Canada weighed in. I think they were jealous of their friends in Nevada, so that was good. Let's go down a little bit further south. Brazil. Love Brazil. Love it when they come in. Again, huge chunk of the planet turns green. And oh, by the way, they seriously know about steak and wine. All right. Going back over here. So we got Israel's in the house. Saudi Arabia. Is that Tunisia is in? Let's peek down a little bit further south. What else we got? South Africa. Love South Africa. Miss them. And then I see India in that upper right-hand corner. So thank you all for continuing to join in. And it looks like Ethiopia, I'm pretty sure that's it. Texas Education did not give me a good geography basis. So yeah, so please keep the comments coming in. Please keep telling us where you're from. Our goal in life is to turn the world Veeam green, one map drawing at a time. So, all right. So Melissa, you mentioned Orchestrator.
Mm-hmm.
But let's bring it back to the data. So again, coming back to, I think it was 3,393, almost 3,400 of our closest friends.
Yeah.
Actually, not our friends, as non-biased research panel, but we asked them, when it comes to recovery, when it comes to BCDR, what kind of failover mechanisms are you out there? Now, I'm gonna explain the wrong ways to do this, and then I want you to pile on that.
You got it.
That lovely percentage in the upper left-hand corner. So when organizations were asked what kind of failover and failback, right? So how am I actually going to do the switch over to the second set of infrastructure? In that lime green upper right-hand corner, 29% of organizations said we're going to manually reconfigure. In the South in the U.S., we would say bless their hearts. Wow. Okay.
I would say you're going to have a bad time. But
that's going to be that's what I
it's
would
not
call,
gonna be fun.
and I forget if it was you or Ren talks about this as a resume generating event.
Yes, definitely.
So I mean, this is you got your CFO and your CIO, one on each shoulder, right? Both wearing red, by the way, at that point, and they're telling you, when are we going to be back up again? Like, well, I just got to reconfigure these IP addresses. I got to configure these LUNs, and we'll be up in no time at all. So that's just the makings of going out of business sale is actually what that is. So then we've got in the bottom 45%, they're using scripts. And Dave Russell, when he first looked at this data, talked a lot about the fact the problem with any kind of predefined script is that the day after you wrote it, it's probably out of date already. And it's really, really dangerous. But then there's all the smart kids in that upper left-hand corner, 1 out of 4 folks. Melissa, break it down. Let's talk about why this matters so much.
Yeah, so 1 out of 4 of my besties out there are recovering with orchestrated workflows, right? We're talking orchestration and automation to actually recover from disaster, but not only recover, test. Like we talked about manual steps and scripts, right? When disaster day strikes, you have to keep in mind that the person who wrote the DR plan and actually knows the app might not be the one actually recovering it, right? Jason, you like to tell a story where there was a flood and your basement was underwater and you weren't going to go to that data center to start restoring servers because your wife probably would not have been too thrilled with that, right?
Yep.
So we're looking at, potentially out of date documentation that people have never touched these systems or trying to restore, and that is just a recipe for disaster. Likewise with the scripts, my 45% of my friends using scripts, you're in a much better place. But you have to be regularly testing those scripts, to Dave's point, right? It could be out of date as soon as you finish it. So if you're testing on a regular basis, and I'm talking about doing DR tests on a weekly basis or something along that cadence, you're going to catch any of those script changes or drifts, right, before they become an issue on disaster day. The whole point of disaster recovery is taking the time now to set things up so you're ready to recover later. If you never put that foundation in place, if you never put in the automation and orchestration in place now, today, you're not going to be able to recover tomorrow. It's really just as simple as that.
Tara on LinkedIn piled on that resume generating event comment from before. Yes, I've known several friends to have their resumes generated for them over the years along the way. Melissa, one of the things I really like about when you think about that orchestration, you've used that T word several times around testing. In one of my past lives, we actually looked at the effects of orchestrated workflows in disaster recovery as it affects overall BCDR readiness. And what we found was in that particular survey, this is several years ago, but what we found was that on average, organizations would test their disaster recovery approximately once every 9 months. Now, back then, what you did on 9 months was you declared a disaster. You went to some nondescript warehouse. You brought all your tapes under one arm, and you reconstituted your server farm. You paid a egregious testing fee in order to do that. And then at the end of a really bad weekend, you went back home and just went back to work. When organizations started embracing orchestrated workflows and elastic infrastructure, what they found was they could actually test some aspect, some set of servers, one rack, whatever it was, one set of apps. They were testing on the average of once every 5 weeks, not every 9 months. Better. And that repetition means they were able to discover all the things they needed to fix in much shorter order. You've had similar experiences like that over the years when it comes to
absolutely. I've actually been doing disaster recovery for most of my career, even as an intern on Wall Street, right? I was part of a DR test. We used to do our DR tests. I had my little clipboard. I checked off the servers, but we just recovered enough to say, hey, we passed our DR test. Look, auditors, please be happy with us, right? A disaster recovery test designed to pass and please your auditors might not be the same as a real-world disaster recovery test that actually tests your recovery abilities. And what a lot of people are doing is they're just testing to get that check mark, right? To say, hey, look, I did my DR test. It was successful. We're good to go. Well, if we're talking about the threat of ransomware, which is basically imminent, that DR test is not actually going to protect you come disaster day. And you won't have the confidence to say, you know what, we've done this before. I hit a button. I watch my test. I'm ready to go. And I know that we're going to be able to recover successfully.
For the folks at home, Melissa and I did what Veeam called a Trailblazer talk, which is a thought leadership enablement talk for senior leaders, and we did one last year called the 9 Keys to Success.
That was fun. That's one of my favorites. Yeah,
that was fun. And one of those 9 keys was if you're looking for green check marks, you will find them when you want them, and not when you need them.
Yeah.
And I love that one. That's one that I've learned from over the years. But yes, so certainly that testing. I will tell you a very short story though. My favorite DR test back when you used to have to do it physically was there was this little beverage company out in Georgia. And their entire data center, you could actually map it A through Z across the top, 1 through X going down. And once a month, they would randomly roll a letter and a number, like playing bingo.
Disaster recovery bingo? Where has this been my whole life?
Oh, this is fantastic. So they would, on the beginning of Friday night, about 8 p.m., they got a letter, they got a number, and they went over and they would turn off all the servers in that rack and physically pull that rack off the floor, put in new servers because they all matched. How cool would that be? And then see, okay, can we actually recover it up? And on any given month, they would randomly take a different rack out of commission and rotate it. It also let them do hardware refreshes along the way. But that's as good as you got before orchestration came in. So anyway. All right, we are coming up close on time, so let's make a few last points. Melissa, I think this is actually the last in our series of insight. I know. Well, I mean, once you've done BCDR, there's nothing left to talk about, right? This is the punchline of all punchlines. But yes, if you have not downloaded the rest of the Data Protection Trends report yet, please do that. VEE.am/DPR22. BCDR was one of like 9 major things that were covered in that project. Make sure to download that and see what the other 8 were. And then lastly, you know what? I got 2 minutes left. Can we see if there's any last map countries? Give folks to say hello, and then we'll come back to close out on VeeamON. Yeah, no, never mind. Okay, so we're going to do VeeamON first. Our producer is saying, wait, the map's not ready yet. We're still filling in all. He likes to color in the lines. What are you going to do? All right, so for VeeamON, so it's coming up in 6 weeks-ish, 5 weeks from now. Super excited. It is a hybrid event. I will be there in person. Melissa will be there virtually. We hope that you come in one way or the other. I think there's some kind of a registration discount, and it ends pretty quickly. So if you're going to come in person, now would be the time to register. So veeam.com or /VeeamON, please make sure to join in for that. If we're ready for the map, let's give a shout out to those last ones to weigh in. See what do we got. So let's take a look at the Americas. There's a lot of beautiful green. Anytime that Brazil and the Argentinians agree, it's a good day. Those and Canada and like the whole new world is all green. That makes me happy. But if we kind of come in on the Americas, let's see. It looks like Barbados and the Caymans. Been to one, would like to go the other. Argentina, we already called out. Let's go over to that's just so pretty. Let's go over to Europe and Netherlands. Got some friends from over there. Bulgaria's in the house. Egypt's in the house. And then one last plug. Is that Indonesia? Fantastic. Okay. Yeah, keep them coming. And if you do have questions, Melissa and I will check the chats on all the platforms, and we will try to pile on as best we can. If not, I think next week is Easter weekend, and so I don't plan on being here, and I don't think Dave is either. So I'm pretty sure we're taking next Monday off, but as well as Good Friday as well. So we'll see about that. Hopefully, we'll see you in 2 weeks, and hopefully, we'll see you at VeeamON. Melissa, thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me again, Jason. We should do this more often.
We really totally should. And as Orchestrator 6 comes closer and closer, I'm going to totally use that as the excuse. Until then, have a great day.